Welcome to the March edition of the Sustainable Kidney Care Network webinar. It takes place on the fourth Thursday of every month from 2 till 2:50. Last month, we had Professor Alberto Ortiz give an absolute masterclass on preventing chronic kidney disease as a win-win for health and the environment. If anybody missed that, I very much encourage you to check out this video. Have I got it pre-saved? Should be appearing in the chat now. And remember, you can catch up on missed webinars on our YouTube and on our network page, which I will also put into the chat. So a couple of announcements before we get started today. Our friends at the Canadian Society of Nephrology have released a superb pre-recorded lecture focusing on end-stage kidney care and climate change. The lecture increases awareness amongst nephrology practitioners on the effects of climate change on kidney care, resiliency, and adaptation measures, and how we can become involved from an education as well as a quality improvement standpoint. I watched the lecture just last week, and if people have time, I really recommend it. It's a fantastic piece of work. I've just put that in the chat. And secondly, we are very proud to announce the launch of our own Sustainable Kidney Care online learning module, which launched just a few days ago. It's part of Kit New Care, which is a Horizon Europe project, and focuses on the bidirectional relationship between kidney care and climate change, and how you can make practical changes to improve patient outcomes whilst reducing financial, societal, and environmental impacts. It features research and case studies from the last few months, so it really is a brilliant module. We're very proud of it. It's free, and it's a live module in the sense that we are shaping it. So do the module, give feedback, help us shape it and make it the best possible resource that it can be. Right, on to today's webinar. Just a little bit of housekeeping at the top. A reminder for people to mute their mics. Otherwise, I have to mute everybody, including the speaker, and it's a minor disaster. So please mute unless you'd like to join the discussion at the end. We will record it and post it on our network. The idea is to facilitate discussion at the end. So if you do have questions, save them. And then at the end, turn your cameras back on for the discussion. It really does help facilitate a better interaction. And lastly, if people do want to present, then feel free to reach out to me so that we can organize that. Right then, that's all of the announcements. I am delighted to introduce our speaker today. Cade Musgrove is 27 years old and has end-stage renal disease. He lives in Lydney, Forest of Dean, and works in Bristol as a manufacturing engineer for a well-known aircraft engine manufacturer. He first got ill with focal segmental glomerulosclerosis in 2014 and has been on dialysis for around 10 years, with the exception of a transplant in 2016 that failed quite quickly due to recurrence. He receives home dialysis 4 times a week for 3 hours each session, as it works best around his working hours and his sleep schedule, enabling him to feel the best he can. He's been on a whole foods, plant-based diet since 2021 for ethical, health, and sustainability reasons, and has noticed serious health benefits that get him one step closer to what he would consider normal. Due to this, he has since developed a deeper interest into nutrition and lifestyle, and we are so delighted and privileged to have him here today with us to share that story. So, Cade, without further ado, I will hand over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. That was really good. I really appreciate that. It's you know what, it's really good to be here and talking to you guys. I can have quite imagined this happening a couple months ago. So really happy to be here and sharing with you some of my experiences into sort of my own life, my own lifestyle, specifically on a plant-based diet. But also I kind of talked a bit about sustainability as well at the end. I mean, it's very um, applicable to this webinar. So I have a presentation. I shall share that now. Cool. Could you guys see that?
Yep, that's perfect.
Amazing. So yeah, I got time for questions at the end if anyone has any. But essentially, yeah, this is just my presentation on end-stage kidney disease and a plant-based diet. Just looking at sort of from my perspective, what I've come across, what I've learnt. But yeah, I will begin. So just quickly, just a brief introduction so you guys can understand a bit more about me. I grew up in a little town called Yeovil in Somerset in England, and lived there for the best part of 20 years. And then I moved up to Bristol where I did my degree apprenticeship with Rolls-Royce as a manufacturing engineer. And since then, I've sort of been living in and around Bristol and the Forest of Dean. I sort of bought my own place a couple of years ago, and I've been living in the Forest of Dean since. But essentially, yeah, that's sort of like a brief background to how I've grown up. Bit about my family. I've got a couple of sisters, got brothers, and there's a couple photos of just picked out here from us. I'm obviously the one in the middle there. And then obviously I gotta mention the dogs as well. So Toby and Lila, love them to pieces. So gotta mention them. And yeah, as the introduction said, yeah, I'm now a manufacturing engineer, fully qualified. Been working in Rolls-Royce for the last, gosh, six years if you include my apprenticeship, but full time really for almost 3 years now, and really been in composites this whole time. I'm also vegan. I mean, it goes well with the plant-based diet, but been vegan since 2021. And just a couple of my hobbies there, sort of like gym, exercise, gaming, cooking, snowboarding as well, when I'm able to. But yeah, that's sort of like a brief background into me. I will continue on to sort of my chronic kidney disease background. This is sort of the timeline 2014 to 2026, I present. So back in 2014, sorry, I was in my penultimate year in secondary school. I was 15 years old, and I started to get like swelling in my legs and ankles. And usually it would sort of be gone in the morning and sort of appear later on in the day. And that was like that for a couple of days, and it sort of got worse and worse. And with that, I was also tired as well. So I essentially went to the GP and had a blood test. Unfortunately, that didn't come back with really anything out of the ordinary. So carried on for another couple days, and about a week later, the swelling had got so bad, it continued to get worse, that it was really quite painful at that point. So I went back to the GP. Saw a different GP this time, and he actually recognised some of the symptoms I was showing of kidney disease. So blood pressure, which was high, and urine dip tests, which showed levels of protein in blood. Essentially, he gave me the diagnosis of nephrotic syndrome there and then. And I got sent up to Bristol Children's Hospital, which was about an hour, 2 hours from where I was living at the time. And they did more diagnoses on me. They did a biopsy, and that biopsy showed FSGS, or focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, which is essentially just the scarring of the nephrons in the kidney. And that meant that I had to go on some medicine, such as some immunosuppressants, such as tacrolimus and MMF. I did some steroids as well, but none of them really worked as such. So that was a shame, unfortunately. But sorry, there's the diagnosis there, and there's a picture of when I was old, my family up in Bristol Children's Hospital. So I think, yeah, so I started haemodialysis in 2016, and that was really because my kidney function had got so to the point where I really needed it. And it wasn't long after that, in 2016, that I actually got my first transplant. About May time. That was done up in Bristol at Southmead, which was actually quite a new hospital at the time. I was in there for, gosh, about 2 to 3 weeks, and that was mainly because I actually had recurrence of my FSGS in that transplanted kidney. So unfortunately, they had to try things like plasma exchange and even haemodialysis at one point, just to try and kickstart the kidney to do anything, but it wasn't really doing anything. So I was sort of swelling up a lot. Unfortunately, it was not a great time, but we got past it. And there's actually a photo from back then of myself. Then about a year later, I had the kidney taken out, and I started haemodialysis before then. Actually, it was between the end of the transplant and maybe about a couple of weeks later that I basically restarted haemodialysis, and just because plasma exchange wasn't really working for me, I wasn't really feeling that well. It wasn't really working at all, so the choice was to go back onto haemodialysis, which is what I did, and I did feel a whole lot better. And then they removed the kidney in 2017 to get me off of some medicine that really wasn't making me feel that well. And I actually started home hemodialysis shortly after that in 2018. And this was actually really, I really enjoyed doing this. I once I first learned about it, I got onto it pretty quickly. And this was a couple of reasons. I was able to kind of had a bit more control over the dialysis, and also the travel time between the units was quite a long time. It wasn't that far. It was quite far away between where I was living. So having it right in home was just a hell of a lot easier. And yeah, so I really quite enjoyed that. But when I moved up to do my apprenticeship, as I mentioned earlier, I had to restart dialysis in a renal unit instead of on home dialysis, just because my accommodation at the time just couldn't have any sort of home dialysis equipment up there, which was a shame. But the unit wasn't too far away from me, so it wasn't too much of an issue. And I was there for roughly about 4 years, and then I actually started home hemo again when I bought my house in 2024, which was just over a year now, which was a really good decision, and I've been doing that since. And in fact, actually, I've sort of switched up my timings from the more regular 3 times a week at 4 hours to 4 times a week at 3 hours, and just doing that allows me to have a much better sleep schedule and just routine in general. So yeah, I'm really quite I do feel a lot better from doing that. And actually, here's a photo of what my setup looks like at home right now. Okay, so I guess onto the diet and lifestyle aspects of things. So starting a plant-based diet, really, I can remember this was back in 2021. I was watching some Netflix documentaries, and something came up called Seaspiracy. Some of you may have heard of it or even watched it, but essentially it's about like the humanity's impact, environmental impact on the planet when it comes to fishing and other sort of agriculture around our oceans, exploiting our oceans. So I watched this and found it really quite fascinating. I didn't really eat much, if any, seafood at the time, to be honest. After watching it, nothing really made me want to change my diet at all, but it did get me really thinking. And in fact, after that, the algorithm, the Netflix algorithm, sort of recommended some more documentaries for me, which was like Cowspiracy, and there was one other one as well. I can't remember, but Cowspiracy, very much like very much like with the agriculture, but for like land use and stuff, and sustainability with that, and that kind of really shocked me as well, and what was being told and the statistics coming out of that. So around climate change and the impact of these farming practices on our food choices on the planet. So I kind of took that and went, all right, I think I'm going to go and try being vegetarian. And bearing in mind, I'd eaten meat and all those other products, animal products, my entire life. So this was quite a new change for me. But I went there, I tried it. But well, I say I tried it. It wasn't really long before I decided to try it that I actually got more recommendations come through, and these were more about the health side of things. So like what the health came through, and so did the Game Changers, both on Netflix as well. Again, watched those, really interesting, and was kind of really shocked about sort of the chronic illnesses that we get as a society, things like diabetes and cardiovascular disease, heart disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, these cancers, all these common killers that we have as a species. So and sort of the drivers towards what is likely causing these or contributing to their cause. So really that just empowered me to just try a plant-based diet. Really, going to a plant-based diet wasn't something that I had even considered from a health perspective for my kidneys. And when I was looking at this stuff, nothing on kidneys ever really came up that I saw. So I just tried it, and I started to notice a lot of benefits from it. So I'll go into that in a second. But I've put up the Eat Well plate because I think this is quite important to note that growing up, this is something that you get told. Now, this specific version has a little slither of sugars and fats from fast food, which is quite shocking. But I mean, generally, you've got your fruit and veg, your carbs and starches, your dairy, and your protein. And the protein side is sort of more focused on the animal-based protein rather than the plant-based protein. This is what I kind of thought was a healthy diet. Now, I probably didn't even stick to this. I probably had a worse diet than that. But even so, that was sort of what I was growing up with. So changing my diet from this to a whole food plant-based diet was a whole new thing. And I had to learn a hell of a lot from resources online about how to do it properly and be nutritionally adequate. And it took me a while to get to that point. But yeah, I will leave it there. So I'd like to just mention some concerns that probably a lot of people, especially people with kidney disease, would have trying to transition to a whole food plant-based diet. First one being phosphate. Now, as a dialysis patient, we take phosphate binders, and before I was on a plant-based diet, I was having about 15, that's 15 phosphate binder tablets a day at 800 milligrams, which was a lot, and in fact was the most I could be taking, and that was just enough just to really keep my phosphate at the required ranges. So moving to a plant-based diet, I was worried that maybe I'd have to take more tablets, or and obviously I couldn't, so that would be a massive conflict. What would I do there? So that was a concern. Another one was potassium. Now, potassium, we often see that in lots of plant foods. They're quite high in potassium. Things like bananas is obviously one of them, but other foods as well quite high in potassium. So I was worried about this, and more so because I actually had to be hospitalized a couple times from potassium issues, which was quite scary. My potassium had gone really high, and this was only from introducing an extra piece of fruit into my diet a day. So quite a small amount to add in and see some quite scary, significant results. So that was obviously a big one for me. Iron. Now, iron. We often, as a dialysis patient, we get given iron injections once a week or once every other week, and I can remember having them on my machine every Monday, and obviously we know that meat and all that kind of stuff is often something that gets brought up as a good source of iron. So if I'm taking that out of my diet, would I then become anemic? Would I have issues there? Protein, again, is something that a lot of plant-based people or vegans get a lot. Is, where do you get your protein from? But this was a genuine concern from me. Is as a dialysis patient, I have to eat more protein anyway to account for sort of the loss from ultrafiltration during the dialysis process. So was I actually going to be able to achieve this? What do I need to eat? I wasn't really quite familiar with a lot of the high protein foods out there. So yeah, that was another one. And then finally, I put calories in there. Now, whole food plant-based diet is generally considered to be lower in calories. And as a tall, slim young person, my calorie intake was generally meant to be a bit higher. And was I actually going to be able to achieve that? I wasn't really too sure. Okay, so just some foods that I then added to my diet. I'll go through this really quickly. Things like nuts, like walnuts, almonds, pecans, nuts like those, really healthy nuts. Seeds, usually milled seeds, but like I'm talking pumpkin, sunflower, flax, chia seeds. Whole grains like oats and barley, wheat, couscous, quinoa, things like that. Legumes like I'd say lentils and pulses like chickpeas and beans. Those are the things I added. Things like plant milk as well. So I substituted a lot of my dairy intake for plant milk. I don't drink loads of it at the moment, but I've put fortified in there because it's also important to have that fortification is really quite useful. Fruit. Now, like I said, wasn't really eating much fruit before this. Now I'm able to eat loads of different types of fruit. Most of them are low potassium, but I can have a banana or two once in a while, which is also really quite good because I love bananas. And then vegetables, things like mostly things like dark leafy greens like spinach, which I know is actually high in potassium, but like bananas, I still can eat it. And kale, which is also very very healthy. I actually put a picture here of what I usually have for breakfast, which is just some oats, some seeds, nuts, and some yogurt. And then really, I guess to move on to sort of the health changes I've seen from a plant-based diet, and considering it's been about 5 years now. So phosphate, again, my first concern. Basically, interestingly, my meds, they actually reduced from 15 a day to 9 a day, which is it's a lot. It's a lot of meds to reduce. Now, originally it was 7. I went all the way down to 7, but that was because I think it's because I first sort of got rid of all the animal products in my diet pretty quickly, but didn't necessarily introduce the plant-based replacements to fill that void. So over the years, I've sort of gradually added new and different varieties of plants into my diet, which will mean that I'm going to get more phosphate, so I'm going to have more phosphate binders. So I've gone from 7 to 9, but even still, 15 to 9 is quite impressive. Potassium, really, my blood results have never really been any better, to be honest. I mentioned a few times where I've actually been hospitalized because of potassium levels being too high. I've rarely ever come across situations where my potassium has been high at all, and I'm quite fortunate that I can actually feel in my body where my potassium is high, get like a tingly, uncomfortable bodily sensation. So I know when things aren't too good. But actually, I've rarely had that same issue with a plant-based diet. It's been very, very stable. The only few times I can think my potassium maybe has crept up a little bit is when I've started to have like short bought soups. And now we know those are going to have less fiber. They're going to have more potassium additives and more potassium in general that's going to get absorbed into your body from those foods. So probably in hindsight, it wasn't the best idea to go for those. But yeah, that's the only time. Recently, it's been quite good. I've actually got some charts here recently of my bloods over the last, I think it's over the last year. Now, obviously, a couple of them are slightly out, but generally they are reasonably stable. Now, the ones from before 2025, specifically in like the first 5 to 6, 7 years of being diagnosed, were very erratic. They were very all over the place. Next one being blood pressure. Now, essentially my blood pressure, these are my blood pressure lowering medicines, I've completely stopped. It was back in 2023. This one probably took the longest to manifest actually, but back in 2023, I started to get very lightheaded at work. Put it down to sort of the heat. It was very hot at the time, and the offices weren't well ventilated. So put it down to that. But actually, going on dialysis, my blood pressure was actually getting quite low, and which is very unusual for me. Usually, my blood pressure would be quite high, and even coming off dialysis at the end, at my dry weight, it would still be quite high. But this was completely different. This was quite low, and it got to the point where I was just getting so dizzy that I just didn't even have a chance to call up the doctor and say, look, can I stop this? I just had to just do it and monitor it very carefully. And I don't recommend to anyone to do that, but I did it, and actually I've not gone back on my meds since. My blood pressure has been normal since. Even on dialysis, it's pretty normal. It'll be high going on because I'm not on my dry weight, but coming off it'll be about 125/70, which is pretty much spot on. So that's really good. EPO, this is very interesting. So I was taking EPO pretty much every other week. It's an injection on the machine on dialysis, and that was going on for as long as I was on dialysis for. And so from 2016 to 2021, 5 years. But then about a year after, about 2022, I kind of realized that I'd been stopped giving it. Like they stopped giving me it, and I wasn't really too sure why. But either or, it's been stopped, and I haven't been on it since, and I've not needed to be back on it since. I don't really understand how a plant-based diet can help with that, but I'm quite happy to be off of it, to be honest. Iron, very similar to EPO actually. I've not quite stopped my iron, but actually my meds have significantly reduced. In fact, so much that I barely take. I don't even take tablets. I don't take injections. The last time I had an injection was in end of 2024 when I first started home dialysis, where I'm living now. Not had anything since. I'm due to start another course very soon, but the fact that I've gone from having an injection every week to barely once a year is again almost like a miracle. Just want to kind of add a little bit of my sort of take on sustainability when it comes to renal failure. Firstly, looking at some of the unsustainable practices that come to mind with dialysis and kidney care. Single-use plastics, I mean, we use this quite a lot. Things that get contaminated with blood and other bodily fluids that need to be disposed of and incinerated. But often things that maybe necessarily don't come in would otherwise be contaminated would otherwise single-use plastics that get thrown away, unfortunately. Excess unnecessary medication. So obviously, in my previous slide, I mentioned all the things that happened in the medicine that I actually managed to reduce quite significantly. So if we are living in a healthy way and following the recommendations, generally, our medication should go down. We shouldn't need to take as much of it, which obviously is going to have an impact on the manufacturers and their carbon footprint when they produce their medication. Diet recommendations obviously is a big one here. Now we know that a whole food plant-based diet is well, hopefully most people here know that a whole food plant-based diet is the most sustainable diet that exists. Due to we know that animal agriculture has a huge environmental impact, things like on water pollution and pollution in general, CO2 pollution. Water usage, land usage, desertification, deforestation, biodiversity loss. I could go on and on and on, but essentially, like I've just got a chart up here which looks at some of the different foods and their environmental impact, especially specifically with greenhouse gases. And you look at the little table, little like chart thing at the top. You've got land use, farm, animal feed, processing, transport, retail, packaging. Things like beef, which is quite a common thing to use. You've got the biggest thing is actually the farm and the land use itself, and you can barely even see things like the transport line, which people seem to like to use as a means of saying that it's actually unsustainable because the transport. Actually, according to this chart, it's not. It's actually the land use and the farming rather than the other stuff. And then you got things like, again, lamb, cheese, more beef. Chocolate is fairly unsustainable as well, but coffee. But then pretty much, if you look at most of the top 10, they're all mostly coming from animal products. And you look at the top 10, or the bottom 10, they're all plant foods. So what I'm proposing is something that we are able to try and recommend is the general renal diet should be a whole food plant-based diet, looking at sort of more of a low protein, low salt, that kind of stuff. But I'll go on to that in a second. Starve resource is another, not necessarily unsustainable practice, but it's sort of a waste. You know, if we're looking at people who are very ill because of their lifestyle habits and their diet choices, then a lot more staff resources required to monitor them or look after them. So if we're recommending that people are going onto a plant-based diet or more healthy habits, then chances are staff resources isn't going to be needed as much for these people. Hospital stays and visits. Now, interestingly, you know, this is also unsustainable. You know, the NHS has only got so much capacity for people coming in that you know, we saw around COVID as well. There just wasn't enough space for people to be admitted. But if we're recommending people are on a healthier lifestyle, then they're not going to be admitted to hospital as much as they otherwise would do. Now, some people have other issues, and that's fine. But anyway, that's that. And actually, I came across some studies which I managed to summarize here. So this is an application I use called Consensus. And I asked the question, can a plant-based diet slow the progression of renal failure? And it sort of scanned through all the available data, things like randomized control trials and things like that. And it came up with, yes was 42%, possibly 53%, mixed 5%. So essentially, it's come up with a conclusion of yes, a well-planned plant-based diet can slow kidney disease progression, especially when a low in protein and focus on whole unprocessed foods, which is kind of what I'm recommending for people. And the actual conclusion that they came up with was, I'll read it out to you. Overall, converging RCTs, cohort studies, and mechanistic data indicate that a well-planned, largely plant-based, low-protein diet can help slow chronic kidney disease progression and delay dialysis, especially when focused on whole, minimally processed foods and managed with a renal dietitian. So that applying to hospital stays and visits, you know, is if we can slow the progression of these things and and have more time to get these things on these diseases under control and understand them and come up with a proper treatment plan for people, then we're going to save a lot of waste and resource in the NHS in general. Really, that kind of comes to the end of my presentation. So I guess I'll say thank you very much for listening and taking the time to host me. I guess open up to questions.
Cade, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for that, for taking time out to put that fantastic presentation together, really bringing it to life with photos, blood results, your sort of journey with end-stage kidney disease, where you are now. I think I speak for lots of people in the room when I say it's one thing to read something in a paper, but to hear a first-hand account told so brilliantly just helps contextualize it in ways that aren't really achievable when we just, you know, read an account in a paper somewhere. So thank you so much for that. I will ask if people are comfortable to turn their cameras back on for the discussion part of the webinar. It does help facilitate a discussion. If you're not comfortable with camera on, that's also fine. And I'll open it up to questions from the floor. Hattie, go ahead.
Hi, Cade. Really great presentation. Thanks for sharing that with us today. I was just wondering if you've got any thoughts of how patients can kind of be reassured if they do have concerns around moving to a whole food plant-based diet, but it's something they're interested in. How can we provide that reassurance? And I'm sure you may have had conversations with other people or other patients about that as well.
Hi, Harry. No, thank you very much for your question. No, it's very, very interesting. I have had conversations with dietitians and other patients as well on it. Some people have been more interested in it than others. But I guess it's quite a big commitment to move to something that you've grown up with and understand from a food perspective and cooking perspective that is going to be quite difficult. But um, how can we be reassured? I guess from my perspective, it's looking at the data and going and looking at the research and saying, this is what the research shows. We know if we do it in this way, that this is probably going to be the outcome. Not a lot of people are like that. I'd say some people more prefer the anecdotes, but I think it's just the constant interaction between the dietitian, the patient, the consultant, to sort of put it out there and say, look, this is what we're seeing at the moment. This is what the data's showing. If you move to a whole food plant-based diet, your potassium levels, which are quite high at the moment, could potentially come down. And trying to see how they feel about that, and just having those conversations. There's loads of resource out there, and also pointing patients to those resources is also important, because I mean, Angeline's on the call right now. She's got so many resources out there. That's really quite incredible. And trying to find that resource as a patient can be quite difficult, especially if you not necessarily know it's out there. But when you're told where it is or pointed to it, it's definitely a lot easier to go find it and look in your own time. But I think sparking those conversations and saying, because I say back when I was first looking at a whole food plant-based diet, I didn't know the relationship between whole food plant-based diets and the management of kidney failure, or slowing the progression of kidney disease, or things like that. It was only after that came across from speaking to other people and just learning on things online and that. So a lot of people don't necessarily know it's out there. I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. That was really helpful.
No worries. Thank you.
Next, guys, move to Katharina, please.
Hi, Kay. Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting to listen to you. I have actually two questions. So the one is, what was at the beginning when you started with your plant-based diet, what was a tough thing for you to do? What did you miss most? Was there even something? And then the other question is, like, when did you realize that it does make a difference to you and how you feel? How long did it take? How much time have you spent on that diet already before you realized a change in your body?
Hi, Katharina. Thank you so much. Great. Again, two really good questions. So, the first one being around sort of around the concerns?
So what you missed is, I mean, did you miss chocolate, for example? Was there something that was kind of tough for you at the beginning?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I was very big. I quite like dairy. A lot of people do like dairy. People find it quite difficult to get it off of it. But I mean, it's an addictive substance anyway, so we know why. But so that was quite difficult. And I tried to move to sort of like the vegan cheeses and stuff, but I didn't really find them quite that interesting. I mean, chocolate. I like chocolate, but I wasn't huge on it. I didn't really miss it that much. But I would say with the dairy, I was having milk, cheese, yogurts. Things like that. I know things like yogurt. I've moved over to Alpro soy yogurt. To milk, I've moved over to Alpro soy milk. But like things like the cheeses have not really kind of looked at as such. Sometimes I will have them if I'm out and like something is in a meal or whatever that comes with it. But generally, none of those are the kind of the things that I missed the most. But interestingly, as I moved into the whole food plant-based diet and added new varieties of foods and different meals into my diet, I sort of got everything out of my system. I wasn't craving anything anymore. And that didn't take very long. It only took maybe a month or two to really be like walking past some pizzas or something and be like, actually, no, I'm not really that hungry. Or I'm not really that craving. that food. And same with salt as well. Like going with a whole food plant-based diet, your salt intake generally goes down if you're not adding stuff to your food, which I don't. So again, it's like when you then have something that's salty, like some chips or something that you get from like a restaurant, and you're like, whoa, okay, you can really taste the saltiness, all the sweetness and things. It's quite an incredible change. And then to your second question, about when did I start noticing these changes? I'd say it took me probably the best part of a year to 2 years to really see and notice the benefits. The potassium I noticed pretty much straight away, because I wasn't having sort of lingering feelings of tinglingness and uncomfortable feeling in my body, and my results were going down, and my phosphate was also going down as well quite quickly, and we noticed that on the blood results, so that my phosphate binders would come down. But it was really like after like the year or year and a half, maybe even 2 year mark, that I noticed I wasn't having the EPO anymore. I wasn't having the iron anymore. Then obviously in 2023, 2 years after I first started a plant-based diet, I then noticed my blood pressure was really, really good. So that was kind of how long it took. But I guess everyone's different.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. As a link to that question, we'll take a question from the chat from Francis Mortimer. Is it important what order you introduce the changes to your diet?
Again, very interesting question. I don't know, honestly, on that one. Does it matter on the order? Really, I think kind of. Sorry, Angeline, you go for it.
I just wondered if it would help at all if I helped with that question, because it probably really doesn't. And Cade's talked about moving gradually across and making changes slowly, because you have to make changes to your shopping and your cooking and your eating behaviors. So that when we're all different, and it could be that you change your breakfast or you just change one meal a week. It really depends what works for that individual person. So there's no hard and fast rules at all.
No, you're right. It's very individualized, and it doesn't really matter, to be honest. I think just getting out the foods that we know are not good for you, high in saturated fat, high in salt, high in cholesterol, out of your diet as quickly as possible, and trying to reintroduce as much fiber as possible into your diet, whereas also going for the varieties. I think doing for that worked for me. For other people, maybe not so much. It might be more difficult for some people to go straight into a plant-based diet from eating meat and dairy and eggs and fish, maybe. But yeah, as Angeline said, it's very individualized.
That's great. And thanks for jumping in, Angeline. That's brilliant. We'll go to Sophie, please.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the talk. It was so interesting. Maybe I missed it because I had one doorbell at a really critical moment. But I was wondering what were the reactions from the health practitioner that followed your case? And I mean specifically, this change came from you as a patient. Were there really diet recommendations that were clashing with your switching? And with the changes you noticed, are they interested in following it up now that maybe taking it along in their practice or in the
Yeah, no, very good question as well. So yeah, I was quite well supported, to be honest, from a dietitian perspective. Whilst it wasn't sort of recommended to me necessarily to go onto a whole food plant-based diet straight away, I did. I think the dietitians mainly try and work with what you like and what you can eat, and try and work with that and mold it to the individual person. Whereas, I went away and I made this decision, and then afterwards, that's when I sort of found out, like oh, actually no, a lot, and this is from the dietitians. Actually, like a lot of data now suggests that a whole food plant-based diet is actually really good for kidney disease. And this is when then I sort of started to meet people like Angeline here, and we've done some work together as well, which has been really good good opportunity and really quite a huge impact. But following up, I mean, generally nowadays I just sort of have general follows up as normal with my dietitian, just a phone call every couple months. But I'm now getting involved with things like this with Angeline, with webinars like that. I've done presentations recently at kidney care events for patients and around diet and nutrition and my experiences with it. So really, it's kind of evolved quite quickly from everything, and I think that's because what I'm seeing in my diet and lifestyle reflects what the data's showing, to some extent. So, that's something we want to push as both a data perspective, but also from a patient perspective. So again, see these people in person as actual individuals and that these things are happening.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Dacre, please.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about the pleasure that you get from food and whether it felt like a burden shifting to this new diet, or at what point food became pleasurable. I mean, you said that some of your tastes changed and you noticed salt and sweet and things like that. So could you talk a little bit about the pleasure of eating?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm just going to move to a different room because my laptop is dying. There we go.
Whilst you're moving
Yeah.
and getting set up, I'll just draw people's attention to the chat. Angeline has put in some resources and there's excellent discussion there as well. So if people haven't taken a look at the chat, please do. Hopefully, Cade, I've bought you some time to put your charger in.
Yeah, there we go. Can you guys still hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. Yeah, so again, yeah, I reiterate exactly what you just said. Is as I've noticed that moving my diet from sort of high fat, low fiber, probably quite salty, really. Even though I didn't add salt, there's still quite a lot of salty stuff in processed food and ultra processed food, and also animal products. My taste buds really did change going from there quite quickly, and I noticed that then when I started to add in salty or sweet foods, I really noticed it, and it was sort of overpowering. And that's that I would say as well, my taste buds have really quite broadened into a higher spectrum. So when I'm having something like a piece of fruit, I can really taste everything in that. Same with vegetables and other foods as well. And even some foods I didn't even know I would like, I've tried and really enjoy. Now I honestly, because I cook a lot of things fresh and I know what I like, and I've kind of perfected those meals. I really do love food, and you can really make some delicious food on a plant-based diet, whole food plant-based diet. And that, I guess, historically has been something that people maybe be fearful of, is going, I'm not going to enjoy it, the food's not going to be very nice. And do you know what, if you're not cooking it properly, you're not preparing it properly, you're not choosing the right foods and combinations of foods, you're probably not going to enjoy it very much. But that's, I guess, where you come in and you work with a dietitian. You try and do those, combine those foods and make them taste really nice, because obviously people aren't going to eat food that doesn't taste nice. I hope that answers the question. Awesome, thank you.
Getting smiles looks like a happy response to the answer. And what a wonderful question to bring this webinar to a close. It's obvious just from the discussion that it's something that everybody is so fascinated about, and I think Cade, you do such a wonderful job of bringing this subject to us in a way that we can discuss.